What is up, guys? I'm Alex with BFE Adventures, and today we are going to go with an in-depth build review and full review of the KTM 690. So stay tuned. Alright guys, so what I wanted to do with this video is basically do an all-encompassing video, everything 690. And so I'm going to try and do that whole separating the video out into different categories so you can scrub to different places if you don't want to listen to me ramble. So overall, basic pros and cons of the bike. Chances are you already have seen the shorter video. If you haven't yet, check that out if you want a short, brief explanation. It's only 15 minutes long, and that kind of goes over my initial thoughts of the 690. Now that I have an extra couple thousand miles on it, and I've done commuting on it, I've done dirt work with it, I've done multiple day trips, I've done motorcycle rallies, and after all of that, I have a very good understanding of how this bike is going to fit me. And so I'm going to basically start by talking about all the pros and cons again, and kind of recap what you heard from the last video. And then I will go ahead and go into the build out. So if you're watching this video, either A, you're probably looking at buying a 690, or B, you already have one and you're looking at building it out. And so hopefully I can help speed you along the path on your build out. So we'll get to that later. Let's start with the pros. I absolutely love this bike to start, so I'm biased. I've had a buttload of them, not to try and boast, but I'm just saying this as in I have a buttload of experience on a bunch of different adventure bikes and a bunch of different dirt bikes. And so I have a unique perspective because I have never been able to keep a bike for very long. Overall pros, I love the bike. The power is incredible. You already know that. It's 74 horsepower, 350 pounds. It's a single cylinder thumper, so it's never gonna be as smooth on the road as a twin. And it is always going to have just a little bit of shake to it. Now I will say this dual counterbalanced engine is incredible. It is incredibly smooth. It does not bother me at all. Even on the twins, without like a throttle lock or a cruise control, my hand will go to sleep after about 20-30 minutes of cruising at the same RPM for too long. And I will say on this bike, maybe it's because I'm constantly cracking the throttle just because I love the sound of the intake, but I have not had my hands go to sleep on this, which is surprising with this big old thumper. I used to have a KTM 625, which was the older version of the LC4 model. I had an SXC that was street legal and like an Enduro, loved it. But this motor is just way, way better in every way. So some other pros to the bike. I actually really like the suspension now that I've dialed it in. I'll get to that with a con here shortly, but the suspension now is plenty supple for my riding. So I'm 170 pounds, I'm 5'9", 5'10" on a good day, and this bike for my moderate riding is plenty. I'm no Graham Jarvis, so I'm not going to be doing crazy hard enduro stuff with it, but I have no problem taking this on single track at all. It does great at single track for what it is, because I know that this is still a 350 pound dirt bike. So I do not expect it to run through the woods like my KTM 300 two-stroke. That's just not going to be the case. I can promise you that it is better in the woods than my Africa Twin was, or better than any of my adventure bikes, bigger adventure bikes for that matter. Back to the suspension. It has enough compression, dampening, and rebound to soak up all of my riding and my weight just fine. So just know that if the suspension seems off to you, chances are you just got to tweak it a little bit. If you're going to be riding really aggressively and jumping doubles with it all the time, then it's probably going to be a little on the soft side for you. I already have this set pretty sporty, we'll just call it that, for my type of riding. So other pros to the bike. It is comfortable for a dirt bike. This is still a dirt bike. It is not an adventure bike, no matter how much people want to say that it is. It's not. It's a dual sport. I love the motor, like I said. The transmission, honestly, is great. It's got tall legs for it, so it can cruise 70, 80, no problem. And it doesn't feel like it's strained. It's easy to pass cars still when you're going that fast. It's good. Now, the gearing will be a little different with the cons here in a second when you get into the tight stuff in the woods. But overall, if you've done any research on this bike, you kind of know what it is. And I think where people get into hot water when they buy this bike is it's a very expensive bike for one, but it's a tall price tag for a bike that you think is going to be a dirt bike, or you think it's going to be an adventure bike, and it will let you down if you're looking to exclusively treat it as one of those. So let's talk about the cons. I'm sure I'll get into some other pros later that I think about, but cons. From the factory, it's corked up. It's got the SAS kit canister, carbon canister on it. It is not a fantastic dirt bike. It's a good dirt bike. It's not a fantastic adventure bike. It's okay at traveling. So some of the cons, the gearing is set up tall. And so in the woods, the gearing is tall. So when you're riding with adventure bikes, for example, this bike likes to go fast. This bike is a very good flowing bike. When you got a flow going in the woods, that's where this is happiest. The front end is very twitchy. I'll get to that in a second. And so you got to ride it aggressively to enjoy its capabilities. Now, when you're riding in a group like I was just last weekend at the GS Giants Rally, I was riding with some other big bikes, and I was going just a little slower than this bike likes to go. And the gearing was really annoying. I was constantly going in between first and second and third, just depending where, and I always wanted to be going faster so I could hit that next gear, and it just didn't sit very comfortably for me. Now, whenever I'm riding solo, as long as it's not too technical, the gearing's fine. You know, as long as it's like anything faster than flowy single track, this bike is great. But when you're getting into really gnarly stuff or really tight stuff that you're just constantly feathering the clutch and that, the gearing is just too tall for that kind of stuff. But the plus to this, or to that, is the clutch is light as a feather. And so it is super easy to work the clutch with one finger, and it doesn't ever wear me out, and it's great. Something else I want to speak to on this bike that people talk about is with the quick shifter. So that was, like, in my opinion, more of a marketing thing than anything. I'm not supermotoing this. It's an Enduro model anyway, but you know, I could see how the quick shifter would be great in that realm, you know, smashing down gears and letting the nanny aids take over and, you know, letting that quick shifter do its thing. Or if you're, you know, power shifting, drag racing a buddy, I could see where that is. But in my opinion, the quick shifter doesn't really do much for me. I don't know if it's the quick shifter itself. I think that's primarily electronic, but one thing I do notice with this bike that I don't like is you have to shift it with authority. If you don't, I find a lot of false neutrals with this. And so with motocross boots, it's totally fine because you know, you're tilting your foot to shift it, and so you're typically shifting with authority just because you don't have the same kind of ankle flex. But there are occasional times where I'm just running into town and you know, or just commuting into work 5 minutes, and I'm just wearing casual shoes because I'm not geared up for it, which, make whatever comments you want on that. But when you're doing that kind of stuff, I hit false neutrals all the time because I'm not shifting as aggressively with, you know, tennis shoes on. But anyway, so that's the one thing I wanted to say about the quick shifter. I wasn't a huge fan of that. The suspension from the factory, going back to that. So the front end was super twitchy. It was set up dead stock standard from the factory, and the front end was really twitchy, and the rear end pogoed me a lot, and it donkey kicked off of every little bump, and I didn't really like that. So I was riding with a buddy that knows suspension better than I do, and we dialed it in on our trip to Arkansas a couple weeks ago, and absolutely loved it ever since. It tracks true and straight all the time. But I'll patch a clip in here so you can see what happens when the front end likes to dance around when it's not set properly. As far as ergonomics of the bike, I have this fairing on here, so it's a little different. So with the Raid Garage fairing, you get a handlebar riser, which I actually love. It fits me way better now when I'm standing. They're almost a little too low for me from the factory. That's just my preference. Some people swear not to put risers in, but that's for the ergos. The other thing with the ergos is the foot pegs, or the foot pegs are small, And the way that this fits when you're wearing motocross boots, and especially knee braces. If you're not wearing braces, it's not as bad, but whenever I know we're going to be riding aggressively, I like to wear knee braces. And by the time the braces are touching this plastic, it kicks your boot way out, and the pegs do not feel very big for your boot. They only catch about half your boot, and so I'm not a huge fan of that. Other ergos, the factory seat's absolutely garbage. We'll get into that with the upgrades, with the seat concepts, but the factory seat sucks. Other than that, overall things to know about the bike, it absolutely loves to chew up rear tires. I know that that is all in this hand right here, but it definitely chews through tires, I'll say that. Overall, that's pretty much it for the basic pros and cons. So you'll get some more if you stick around for my additions. So now let's get into that. So starting at the front, I added the Raid Garage fairing kit for two main reasons. One, I think it looks cool as all hell. And two, I really wanted my navigation up in front of me. And just because when we're on the trail, I like to see it right there, right in front of me, instead of looking down at my handlebars while I'm trying to stand. It's just nicer to have it up here. So, and then a third thing that I'll just add is on this bike, by the time it's got the traction control switch and all that stuff, and my heated grips and ram ball mount for my GoPro, there's hardly any handlebar space left to add that kind of, like a phone and that kind of stuff. So I'm just not a fan of crowding my handlebars. So I like to keep it open. That's why I got just a giant loop bag here for my bungee cord and like to strap stuff to the back and my registration, and I keep it at that and keep it simple. Other than that, the build quality of the Raid Garage kit is incredible. I know that Aurora makes one, Nomad ADV makes one. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head. They all do the same thing. As far as the wind protection goes for keeping the wind off of you, this does a pretty darn good job. It's no adventure bike, so don't expect that, but it does get the wind off of your chest. It kind of hits me about my shoulders. Like I said, I'm 5'9", 5'10", and it still dumps air on my helmet, but it's really clean air, and it doesn't bother me at all. The only time I really notice it is if there's a heavy crosswind, which it would probably bother you on any bike, then it seems to buff it pretty hard there. Moving back a little bit, I got my Cycler Pro Bend handguards. I mean, pick your favorite handguards. I tend to like these the best, so that's just what I have on most of my bikes, actually. Moving back from there, for the life of me, I am drawing a blank on these mirrors, but you look up any dual sport mirror, it's those. So use those. They rock. You don't have to worry about them breaking. They just fold out of the way if you crash, if you forget to fold them in. If you're riding off-road, just fold them in and you're good to go. So I highly suggest these. The other thing about this is they're so adaptable that I will, when we're riding in a group, I will have one mirror set to look behind me when I'm seated, and then another mirror set to look behind me when I'm standing. And so that way I can always get a view of who's around me. So I really appreciate that. Also, I have heated grips on this bike. After having them on all the bigger adventure bikes, it's just a no-brainer for me. Anytime it's less than 50 degrees out, I got my my grip warmers on anyway. So I'm going to put them on any bike I'm going to spend a lot of time on. So I do love that. Moving back, I got a Moscow tank bag. So this is the Gnome. I got this because it has a little 1.5 liter hydration pack on it, and when I'm doing just casual day rides and that kind of stuff, and I'm not taking my drone with me, I have no reason to put my climb pack on the back, and I'd rather just not have a backpack on. So that's why I have this guy. From that, I'll go right into why I was a little hesitant to get a tank bag, and that's because I have the Raid Garage storage kit on the inside, and I do want to speak to that for those of you that are considering it. I don't know why, but I had this twisted idea that the storage compartment was somehow going to be semi-waterproof, semi-dirt-proof, dust-proof, and that is not the case at all. So I learned that very quickly with my registration that I was keeping in there, and it was junk in one ride in the rain, and just the muddy water that was getting slung up from my tire, I guess, or the people around me, it got in there and ruined everything. So the storage box is still useful because now I put an inner tube in there, like an extra pair of tire irons that I don't want to put in my tool pack. They go in here, just stuff like that that I don't really care if it gets dusty, and it's something that you're not going to be getting access to all the time. So this seat does not come off very often anymore. Plus side to getting the storage compartment, I would say one of the first things I would do if I were to do it all over again, knowing what I know, I would have done this no matter what anyway, just because it comes with the Raid Garage intake. I'm pretty sure it's very similar to the Rottweiler intake, and it just allows it to breathe. It sounds incredible. It really makes the bike sound good, and I just love that intake noise. So that's more of a visceral thing, okay? Moving back farther, now we can talk about some of the stuff we've added here. I got the Outback Motor Tech crash bars. So some of the guys on like the 690 Facebook page, actually somebody just asked about these today, and they're like, you know, I don't know if I just want radiator guards or if I should go crash bars. I don't know if I want the added weight. I honestly don't know what these weigh. We'll call it 10 pounds. My opinion is you're already on a 350-pound dirt bike. No, you don't want to make this weigh as much as a T7, but if you're that worried about 10 extra pounds, eat a few less hamburgers and call it a day. I like the extra crash protection that's not only radiator protection, but also fairing protection. This bike's beautiful. I want to keep it that way. And this is a great company. I like the way that they mount. It looks pretty factory, and they're great. Very, very solid crash bars. Love them. Moving back to here, I don't know if you can even see that, but I got the Rottweiler block off plate. One of the first things I did was the SAS and charcoal canister delete, because when you fill the gas tank with gas and it's hot, the gas expands, it bleeds out into the charcoal canister, and then as soon as you go take off and you're heavy-handed on the throttle or you ride a wheelie, then it's dumping gas on your leg, and that was annoying. So that was the first thing I did, actually. Moving down, I got the AXP skid plate on there. I love it. It's a UHDP skid plate, which stands for ultra high density polyethylene, I believe. And I just like these because they're really tough. They glide over rocks a lot easier than aluminum or other metals. And yeah, I just like it. It also has great cutouts for oil changes. You don't ever have to take the skid plate off, which is also great. I've had skid plates in the past that have the cutouts, and that's cool. But the way that the skid plate's designed, it still pools oil in it. Like, you can get your tools up in there to change the oil, but it's still going to run into your skid plate, and it doesn't run out, and that's annoying. You still have to take the skid plate off anyway if you want it to be clean in there. This, the way it's designed, the oil comes out, doesn't even hit the skid plate. It's fantastic, so I like it. One of the negatives to the skid plate that I know is a problem is this plastic weld here will seem to split. I feel like it's just a certain run of them that did that. Mine hasn't done it yet, but I do know people are having that problem, and I think you can reach out to them and they'll just replace it for free. Moving on back, I just got my case saver here. Don't want a brake lever to puncture the case while we're out there. One of the additions that I have yet to make that I will is, if you heard the beginning part of this video, if you didn't scrub past it, I'm going to get bigger foot pegs just because of the ergonomics of this thing. It would be nicer to have bigger foot pegs. One of the gripes that I have about this bike, I don't even know what I'm going to do for it aftermarket yet. It could be something really stupid that I just don't know, but most of the brake lever adjustments, and even in the maintenance manual and stuff, the only brake lever adjustment there is to adjust the position of the lever. And as you can tell, I have mine perfectly flush with the foot peg, which is what I want, which is what I believe you should want. But the problem is you have to push it all the way down to here to get it to start engaging. And that could be an adjustment in the back that I just have to dive into. I honestly haven't put that much effort into it. I should, because it's one of the most annoying things about this bike. And so when you're going downhill and you're trying to keep the rear weighted because you're dragging the rear brake or, you know, skidding the back end, you want to keep your weight back, but you can't, because if you're in motocross boots, you got to put your weight way forward on the bike to try and get your foot down there to hold the brake. So it's annoying. So I don't really know what I'm going to do about that yet. Next thing, moving back, I have the steg pegs. These things are incredible. I cannot believe I have gone this long in my life without putting these on other bikes. They're awesome. You lock your boots into them when you're going up a hill, when you're riding a stand-up wheelie, or, you know, pulling the front end across the creek or something like that. It gets all the pressure off your hands because your boots are so locked into the bike. It takes no effort at all to keep your knees locked onto the bike because the boots are locked in against these pucks. It's incredible. I highly suggest adding this if you have a 690 or any bike for that matter. And steg pegs, if you're watching this, feel free to send me all of those for all the bikes. Next addition I made was the Seat Concept seat. Actually, whenever I bought the bike, this was an addition that came with it that he hadn't even tried yet. And if it didn't come with it, this would have been the first thing I bought, because that stock seat was absolutely terrible. This thing's great. They also make a low version, I believe, so if you're vertically challenged like me, you can go that route. I just don't mind a tall bike, so this is totally fine by me. Moving on back, these are just the Tusk smaller bags. I don't remember the actual model, but I just pulled these off my WR for now. This is just something that I keep on the bike at all times, just so I can like throw my hat in here, throw a hoodie in there, that kind of stuff whenever I'm out for a day trip. If I was going to be camping, I'd probably get a bigger set. I'm actually waiting until the Reckless 40 Woodland comes back in stock for Moscow so they can all match, and I will put some 40 liters on this for camping trips. Moving on back, I have the pre-run rack on here. In my opinion, you have to have a rack on the back if you're ever going to strap something down. Everything back here is super smooth since this is the gas tank, so there's nothing to hook to if you don't have that. I know the stock bike has little handlebars here, or handles. I guess you could, you know, strap it to that if you really wanted. But anyway, moving on, we have the Vanash Motorsports gas cap filler. The main reason you want to get this is because this factory gas cap is in the fender, and it's very easy to get mud and dirt to fall into your gas tank, and that is no good whenever you're trying to fill it up after a fun ride. So the only downside to this is there's no key insertion, but that's not a downside to me. That's a positive. Now I don't have to take the key out of the ignition to get into the gas tank, and where I live, I'm not worried about somebody messing with my gas. So moving on to the back of the bike, I have the Sycas, or I hope it's actually pronounced Sick-Ass Racing flush mount turn signals. That is because the factory blinkers suck. The first time I took it out off-road, I didn't even crash it yet. I was just riding aggressively on some rough terrain and snapped the light off. And it wasn't like, I'll come up here, it wasn't like where the indicator meets the bolt, where I believe it is. It's designed to break there so you can just snap it back on later if you wreck it. It actually broke at the light, and so it was useless at that point. So anyway, those got swapped out. I'm going to swap out the front ones before too long anyway. The next thing, I will talk about what I was going to do to the tail tidy, and I decided against it. So I rode with some guys in Arkansas, one that had a bike similar to this with a tail tidy, and he had stuff slung all over his back because it was raining that day. And I just decided, yes, it's ugly, but it's practical, so I'm keeping it. I even had the whole rear end tore apart to put some form of a tail tidy on this, and actually just changed my mind and put it all back. Moving around to this side, I still have the stock exhaust on it. The next thing I am doing to this is going to be upgrading this to a wings exhaust, just because everything is so hot back here. Anything that ever gets near it melts, and it's just annoying. And also it sounds like a sewing machine, and you want to hear that big old thumper slapping in there. So I am going to help it breathe a little bit. I don't even know if you can see in the video, I got just the Tusk foot pad extender. I think that's a must because, you know, you're riding this thing off road and you're in the mud and it's going to sink. So it's not ideal. Something else I'll speak to, you can't really see it from here, but I added the ABS dongle, and there is a bunch of deliberation we've had on the other video, the 690, on whether or not that is necessary. And in my bike, it was necessary. So mine, my understanding based off of my conversations in the other YouTube thread is, depending on the country of origin and the year, determines how the ABS functions here. So I know that the 19 plus models were different just because of the map switch and the traction control switch and all that stuff on the handlebar. But basically, this is a 2021 US model, and I can promise you that when you are in mode 2, which is the off-road mode, the ABS is still either all the way on or all the way off to both wheels. There's no off-road ABS, there's no ABS to the front wheel and none to the rear. It's just on or off. And it was so annoying to me riding in a group because the ABS and traction control and all that, it resets every time you turn the bike off. And you can't turn the ABS off unless you roll the bike like 10 feet, in order to get it all to sync up and reset. Then you can actually hold the button down. So anytime you're geared up, you're ready to go off with your buddies, and then you go to take off, and then you got to stop 10 feet later and then hold the button down for 5 seconds, and everybody's already gone. And it's just annoying. So I got the ABS dongle strictly for that. The benefit to getting the ABS dongle is it does give me off-road ABS that now just stays on all the time. And so I do have ABS to the front wheel, not to the rear, and I like it. So it holds all of your settings. Now, while I'm talking about that, I'll talk about the map switch and all of that stuff as well. I should have talked about it earlier, but we'll talk about it now if you made it this far. So map 1 is street mode, and so the power comes on more abruptly. All of the nanny stuff is engaged. So traction control is extremely intrusive. It's not going to let you ride a wheelie. It's not going to let you slip that rear wheel at all, because in a road high traction environment, chances are if it's slipping, something bad's happening. And so that is why it does that. So you have to turn the traction control completely off in road mode if you want to like ride a wheelie or something, which you shouldn't ride a wheelie on the road, so don't do that. Map 2 is the off-road mode, and so the power does not come on as aggressively because it's assumed that you're in a low traction environment, and so when it comes on more gradually, it's going to get power to the rear wheel like it should. It does modulate traction control better, and it's a very good system. The only other bike that I would say rivals it is actually my Africa Twin, was very good with its off-road traction control settings, but this one will still allow you to slip the rear out, and it does a very good job of that. And you can still wheelie over obstacles and wheelie through creeks and that kind of stuff. But I will say, if your front end is in the air long enough that the front tire starts slowing down, it's going to mousetrap you back to earth. Ask me how I know. So just keep that in mind. So most of the time, at least how I ride this, I have the ABS dongle in. So I have off-road ABS on. I'm typically in map 2 if I'm off-road, and I have traction control just off. So that's just how I ride the bike most of the time. So overall, that is the full build out that I can see or think of off the top of my head while I'm looking at this. If you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, please let me know. I'd be happy to go into detail about certain things. I just didn't want to get too long-winded talking about all the little things that I like. For example, something I will add just for this. I love this Moscow bag because of the MOLLE webbing on the top, because when my gloves are all nasty and wet and muddy and I'm trying to like move my navigation screen, I can't do it very well. And so now I can just keep a stylus clipped into this MOLLE webbing, and I can use a stylus whenever I need to, and it's super handy. So that's the kind of little stuff that I'd be happy to talk about if you have any questions about them. So feel free to ask. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this little overview of the 690. I'm absolutely loving it. Overall, the main thing for you to know about the 690 is it is a jack of all trades and a master of none. And so where it gets into hot water is when people buy it expecting it to be a master of something, and it's not. And so for me, all of my riding is within 2 to 3 hours of home, and I can ride all day, multiple days in a row on this and be perfectly comfortable, more so than like, you know, dedicated woods bike. And I don't mind traveling highway for, you know, 2 hours to get there, because this bike can handle that very comfortably. So for me, it's perfect. If you're going to be doing, you know, 80% off-road and it's going to be aggressive off-road, then you should not be looking at this bike. If you're going to be doing 50-50, well, that's when you're really getting into the gray area of whether you should get a bigger bike. So for me, I would say mine's more 50-50, but I wanted to ride more aggressively off-road, and so that is why I went this route instead of keeping the Africa Twin. So that's actually why I sent that one down the road. Comparing it to other bikes in the category, I have either owned or exclusively ridden KLR 650s, DR 650s, XR 650Ls, XR 650Rs, DRZ 400s, KTM 500s, KTM 530s, all the same thing. I've not really ridden the Husqvarna equivalents, but they're all the same bike practically. So to compare it to some of those, this is not the same bike as the 500s, period. The 500s are dirt bikes. This is more comfortable. It cruises better. The maintenance intervals are longer. This is just if any of that sounds good to you, then look at this over one of those. If you want more aggressive off-road and you don't care about maintenance, then look at those because they'll be way better than this. To compare it to the other 650s. The KLR, I would say, is not even honestly in the class like this bike. The KLR to me is a cruiser. It can be a dirt bike. It's a Swiss Army knife, and it's rugged, and it's budget-minded, and it's easy to work on, and all of those things are great about the KLR. But its suspension is lacking, the motor is lacking. It's just not even, in my opinion, in the same category as this bike. And it shouldn't be for the price difference, so that's understood as well. So the XR650 and the DR650, I would say the XR650R is definitely the closest rival to this bike, but then you still have reduced maintenance intervals, you still have just less comfort, more vibrating engine, that kind of stuff. You still have Honda reliability though. So the DR650 and the XR650L, and I'll even throw the DRZ400 in there, and you might wonder why I'm categorizing it in there. In my opinion, power-wise, the DRZ400 and the 650 feel pretty similar in riding characteristics. The 650 is a little more grunty, and it definitely cruises easier than the 400, and it's definitely heavier. So the DRZ would be probably more in this category, or the DR650 would be more of a cruiser like this. The XR650L and the DR650 are very similar in their intended use, as you would assume. But the motors are less powerful, the suspension is not as good, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you're looking in that category of bikes and you have the budget and you don't mind the price tag of KTM maintenance sometimes, then it's a no-brainer. Just get this and save yourself from buying it and then riding with somebody that's got one and then being like, yeah, I should have bought that. If you want to stay more budget oriented, those 650s will go everywhere that this bike could, easily. To compare this to like a T7 or a Touareg 660, that's honestly, in my opinion, a different class of bike. Those bikes are intended to be more comfortable. They're twins, they cruise easier, the seats are bigger, the gas tanks are bigger, you know, all of those things make those adventure bikes and not dirt bikes. So yeah, so it just goes back to your intended method of use. That's really what it boils down to. One last thing I'll touch on, because I was talking about that, is fuel mileage and fuel economy. This bike, I've checked it, I get about 42 miles to the gallon, between 42 and 44. That's where I've sat, whether it's commuting, whether it's off-road riding, whether it's, you know, highway running. That's just on average between 42 and 44 miles a gallon is what I'm getting with this. This only has a 3.6 gallon tank, and so, you know, you're only going to go 130 miles and then your light's going to come on. So, you know, you got to know that this range is going to be under 150 miles for the most part, unless you put that auxiliary tank from Raid Garage in there, or any of the other constituents that do something like that. So I did want to just include that. But other than that, I feel like that pretty much sums up the 690, sums up my build of it. I absolutely love this bike, and I actually think I'm going to keep this one for a while because I just absolutely love it. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. If you're interested in joining us on tour or doing any of the trainings with BFE Adventures, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Check us out on the website, see what we're all about. One of the biggest things I can ask for you is to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It doesn't take you any time, it's no skin off your back, but it helps me out more than you know. So if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I'd appreciate it, and you can get more cool content on the 690 and our other bikes as they come. We have some other really cool videos coming up for some of the bigger bikes. We're going to do a huge shootout between all of the big name big bikes in the category nowadays coming up soon. So stay tuned, and hope to catch you guys soon. Take care.